All right, good afternoon. Chapter 5, Biology 1302, Photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is the process by which plants capture energy from the sun and convert it using the solar energy, water, and a simple gas, carbon dioxide, and they convert those into sugars, lipids, proteins, carbohydrates, complex carbohydrates, whatever the plant needs. Photosynthesis is, again, the process of converting light energy into chemical energy. These organisms that do this are called producers. We also, if you'll recall from a previous chapter, there are other organisms that are called consumers. These are the producers, plants generating the plant for eating, for organisms to eat, the consumers to eat. Photosynthesis is a series of chemically controlled reactions that uses, again, the energy from the sun to assemble carbon dioxide from the air into molecules like this C6H12O6 is glucose and other carbohydrates. The animals and fungi and other consumers then turn around and eat the producers. The sugar is used in cellular respiration to make ATP for the cells to use. We'll talk about ATP a little bit later. Sunlight powers photosynthesis. You have three products or three reactants. You have sunlight, you have carbon dioxide, and you have water. Those things work together to form the sugars and oxygen gas. Again, some textbooks will refer to this oxygen gas as a byproduct, others just simply as a product of the reaction. Again, this textbook calls it a byproduct. As sugar is formed during photosynthesis, oxygen gas is released into the air. So here's the oxygen gas that you and I breathe. When we then turn around and exhale, one of the gases we exhale is carbon dioxide. And here's the carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide, water, and light produce sugar and oxygen. We then use the oxygen. We consume this. And in the metabolism of this, we produce CO2. The suns emit energy in what are called waves. The different types of light, you have these very short wavelength radio waves, and then you have microwaves and infrared and ultraviolet and X-rays and gamma rays. The part of the light that you and I can see is referred to as visible light, and all the light energy waves. Here's visible light right here. Just those few. I won't ask you to remember that visible light ranges from around 400 nanometers to 750 nanometers. I don't care that you remember that. What I do want you to remember is that shorter wavelengths of light have higher energy than longer wavelengths of light. So the short ones have a whole lot more energy. After all, long waves, microwaves, short waves, gamma rays. So these are the wavelengths. Over here are the visible light. If you shine visible light through a spectrum, you will see it break down into its color components. And those are based on, again, their wavelength. You have red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and violet. These used to be called blue and indigo. That's where we got the old thing about Roy G. Biv. Recently, they have started calling the lighter blue. This used to be referred to as indigo, the sort of halfway point between blue and purple. For whatever reason, a few years ago, the change was made to call this one blue. And then the lighter blue, what we originally called blue, is now referred to as cyan. If you have one of those printers that has 4 or 5 different color cartridges that you have to buy, one of those is the blue one, which is not called blue, it's called cyan. Only certain wavelengths of light reach the Earth based on the atmosphere and some other characteristics. Again, that's the visible light. Those are the wavelengths that are received to us. and we perceive those wavelengths as different colors. Again, you see the longer wavelength of the red and the short wavelength of the violet. Plants and other photosynthesizers capture photons of visible light. All of this different visible light hits the leaves of the plants, and the light will either be reflected, absorbed, or transmitted. Pigments are molecules that capture energy from light. What happens in the way things are, the colors that they appear. My shirt, this area of my shirt right here is red, and the reason it's red is the visible light is coming in. All the light is being absorbed. All of the spectrum is being absorbed except the red light. The red light is bouncing back, hitting you in your eyes, thus showing you that I'm wearing a red shirt. So what this picture right here shows, you see these shows three different photosynthetic pigments. You have chlorophyll A, which is the darker of the greens, and then you have chlorophyll B, which is the sort of the lighter green, which is here, and then you have the carotenoids, which are the yellows, and you see right there that they have a very close wavelength. The wavelength is the distance from here to here, and what you see on this picture is, as all of this light is coming down, you see the sort of yellowy green part is being reflected. That's why green plants look green, is because not because they're absorbing the green spectrums, the green wavelengths, they are reflecting the green wavelengths of light. Again, chlorophyll A is the main photosynthetic pigment in plants. It is the one that is the greenest. And it reflects most of the green light, and while reflecting the green light, it's actually absorbing the reds and the oranges and the blues and the violets. Plant pigments do not absorb green light. Again, they reflect them. Only absorbed light is useful for photosynthesis. Since the green light is reflective, that's why that's why leaves appear to be green. Plants contain cells called mesophyll cells. If you look at, here's a leaf, gas exchange occurs in leaf parts called stomata. The stomatas are in the bottom of the leaf. They're not shown very well on this drawing, but there where you see the air, the CO2 going in, and then the water and the O2 coming out, those are the stomatos. These are the mesophyll cells. This area down here is called the spongy mesophyll. It's called spongy because it kind of looks like a sponge. These tall cells are called palisade cells, but collectively, all of these are called mesophyll cells. Chloroplasts are large organelles found in plant and algae cells. Most photosynthetic cells will have between 40 and 200 chloroplasts. If you look very closely at all of these cells in here, with the exception of these sort of red ones, that's something else we'll talk about later. But they all are filled with little green dots. The little green dots are the chloroplasts. In eukaryotic cells, chloroplasts are where photosynthesis takes place. There's a cross section of a chlorophyll, or a chloroplast. This is actually an actual photomicrograph of an individual mesophyll cell, showing the central vacuole, which we talked about in a previous chapter, primarily used for storing water. And then here's an artist rendering of the chloroplast. These little stacks of membrane-bound structures are referred to as an individual one is called a granum. Collectively, they are all called grana, G-R-A-N-A. Each individual granum has a thylakoid and a thylakoid space. It is within the thylakoid space that the reactions of photosynthesis are actually going to take place. Again, the pigment molecules are found in the membrane of the thylakoid within the chloroplast, and that's where the reaction is going to happen. In here, in this void space, is where most of photosynthesis is going to take place. In a moment, we're going to talk about two sets of reactions. We're going to talk about the light reactions and the so-called dark reactions. And one of them takes place in this membrane, and the other one takes place in this little void space. Photosynthesis takes place in structures called photosystems. A photosystem is nothing more than a large protein that is found in the thylakoid membrane. Again, that's this membrane here of the thylakoid. It has what are called antenna pigments, and then it contains what is called a reaction center. The antenna pigments are what actually attract the light photons, and then the photons are then passed through the reaction center that contains the chlorophyll, and that's where the process actually happens. Again, chemical reactions, overall the reactions are reactants are light, water, and carbon dioxide. Products are oxygen and sugar. And again, you see these things coming in. You have the carbon dioxide coming in. It's working in one set of reactions over here. The water comes in over here. There's another set of reactions over here. Again, here's the light reactions. The carbon reactions are the ones that used to be the so-called dark reactions or the light independent reactions. The light reactions is where the light energy is captured and converted to chemical energy. The carbon reactions is where energy is used to produce sugar. Again, the phrase carbon reaction is a relatively new term. If you maybe took biology a few years ago in high school and you remember going through photosynthesis and you learned about the light and dark reactions, or possibly the light dependent and light independent reactions. Those dark reactions, the light independent reactions, are also sometimes called the Calvin-Benson cycle. All of those things are now being referred to in lots of textbooks as the carbon reactions, because these are the ones where carbon is being fixed. The light reactions, they occur in the thylakoids of the membrane, and the thylakoids of the chloroplast, and they require water and light. That's why they're called the light reactions. They require light, and this is where the water is going to be used. ATP and NADPH are produced to carry stored energy from one set of reactions to the other. And then oxygen gas is formed as a byproduct. So it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to make yourself a mental note that in what part of photosynthesis is the oxygen produced? It is produced in the light reactions. So the light reactions work by the energy of light exciting electrons. Those excited electrons will create what is referred to as a hydrogen gradient. You see lots of hydrogen in here, not a lot of hydrogen out there, and so the hydrogen starts to be pumped in, and then here it's being pumped out, and every time it's pumping out, you're producing ATP. The pigments again are going to transfer the energy. I don't care that you remember there's a P680 photosystem and a P700 photosystem. We're not going to go into that great a detail. If you want to study photosynthesis in that much detail, I would suggest you take Miss Miles' botany class. I'm sure she goes into great detail into the different stages of photosynthesis. But light strikes the first photosystem. Chlorophyll absorbs the light. Energy is transferred to its electrons, which then which come from water molecules. The electrons are boosted to a high energy. Then the electrons move to the electron transport chain, where they're passed from carrier to carrier in the transport chain. Potential energy in the electrons is used to create that hydrogen gradient that I showed you a moment ago. Then the hydrogen from the electron transport chain passes through the enzyme called ATP synthase. Remember, SYNTH, synth means to make something. You synthesize it. ASE always indicates an enzyme. And since it's called ATP synthase, this is the enzyme that makes ATP. So you see you have an ADP come in, and this enzyme allows that third phosphate group to be added to form ATP. Then in photosystem 1, the electrons from photosystem 2 move on to photosystem 1. Chlorophyll then transfers light energy to the electrons, and they are boosted to a high energy level once again. And again, there's another electron transport chain for photosystem 1, where the chlorophyll again transfers light energy to electrons. The electrons move to a second electron transport chain, and then the electrons reduce NADP to NADPH. Now, ultimately, the carbon reactions, which is the one where most of the sugar is going to be made, again, they used to be called the dark reactions. And that got confusing because people thought, okay, they're the dark reactions, they must happen at night, and that's not necessarily the case. So they started calling them the light independent reactions, which said that they don't require light, they just simply need the products of the light reactions. Now, again, most books, most texts are referring to them as the carbon reactions, because these are the reactions where the products of the light reactions are being converted into carbonized structures like sugar. Again, this is where the CO2 comes in. During the carbon reactions, the carbon in the sugar molecules comes from the CO2. ATP and NADPH produced during the light reactions carry that stored chemical energy, but which was derived from the sun. In the carbon reactions, that energy is used to break the molecules of CO2 and build molecules of sugar. So the carbon reactions occur in the stroma. If you look back a whole bunch of slides, if I can find it right quick. Next one. This is a thylakoid. The area outside the thylakoid, all of this is the stroma. So you have the thylakoid and the stroma. One set of reactions happens in this membrane, and then the products of the light reaction leave and go out into the void space around there, and that's where they get used. Oops. Right here. So ADP and NADPH from the light reactions power the Calvin cycle, which assembles CO2 molecules into carbohydrates. And again, sugar is a very simple carbohydrate. These are the carbon reactions, also known as the Calvin-Benson cycle. You have carbon fixation occurs. Then you have PGAL synthesis, where product called PGAL, another word about this long. Don't worry about that. We're not going to expect you to know that. Then we have, again, the sugars being made. Here we've got cellulose and sucrose and starch and all kinds of other different sugars and different carbohydrates can be made. And then you have the regeneration of RUBP, which then goes and makes Rubisco, and Rubisco will be but the enzyme that forms that unstable intermediate. So carbon is removed from molecules of carbon dioxide. The molecule or the enzyme that does that is an enzyme called Rubisco. That's this structure right here. That is abbreviated RUBP. That combines to form an unstable 6-carbon organic molecule. This unstable intermediate. That unstable intermediate will be broken in half, ultimately to produce PGAL. The PGA was not the PGA that you're thinking about. The PGA is as a molecule, and it will be converted to PGAL. Once PGAL leaves the cycle, multiple PGALs combine to form molecules of glucose, which is a very simple sugar. So you have 3 and 3, and now you have a 6-carbon structure. You hook 2 of these together, and you can make something like sucrose. You hook a bunch of them together, and you can make cellulose, or you can make starch, or you can make glycogen. You can make all kinds of other things. RUBP is a 5-carbon sugar molecule. Here, you get one more carbon from the carbon dioxide, and you wind up with the 6-carbon sugar. Again, the 6-carbon sugar is not very stable. and it wants to break apart very easily, and it does. It breaks apart into 2 3-carbon items. You see a 3-carbon here, 3-carbon there. And then plants use the sugar for many things. Glucose fuels cellular respiration in plants so they can make ATP. It also is used to build complex sugars and polysaccharides in plants. These are the 2 biggies. There's also another one that occurs that we'll talk about it later. We've already talked about chitin, and we spoke about glycogen. Glycogen is found in animals. So these are the 2 primary complex carbohydrates that plants are going to make. They're going to make starch, and they're going to make cellulose. Cellulose is going to be the component of the stems and the roots and the trunks of trees. Those are all primarily cellulose. Starch is a storage component. Potatoes, turnips, radishes, all of those things contain quite a lot of starch. Photosynthesis includes light reactions and carbon reactions. We talked about those. In the light reactions, chlorophyll captures light, transfers it to the electrons, forms ATP and NADPH, and oxygen as a byproduct. The carbon reactions, we have Rubisco, powered by ATP and NADPH, removes carbon atoms from CO2, uses them to make sugar. Plants don't necessarily do things the same way. All plants don't perform photosynthesis the same way. There's actually 3 different types of plants. The one we've been talking about so far is C3 photosynthesis, which is used by most plants. Most house plants that you would have in your home are C3 plants. There are, however, a couple of other types of photosynthesis pathways. There are plants that are called C4 plants, and there are plants that are called CAM plants. They each do photosynthesis a slightly different way because they have different formations or different ways of forming carbon or fixing carbon. Each different way has its own set of advantages and disadvantages, depending on the environment in which the plant lives. Most plants are readily evolved or adapted to the environment in which they live. There are plants that grow in Hawaii that we can't grow in Arkansas. There are plants that grow in Arkansas that won't do well in Hawaii. There are things that do well in Alaska that won't do well in Florida. So again, each one of these different types of photosynthesis has its advantages and disadvantages, and a lot of that is based on environment. The C3 plants do well in cool, moist weather. C4 and CAM plants do better in weather that is hot and dry. Again, you see the example here is the C3 plant. This is what goes on during the day in a C3 plant. You see, you take carbon dioxide or oxygen, and it goes into the Calvin cycle, which again, those are the carbon reactions. You then have the C4 plant, which this process, it doesn't show it, but it breaks the sugar down into 2 3-carbon molecules. This one, we break it down into a 4-carbon molecule, ergo C3 and C4. Again, if you'll notice that the C4 plant, or the C3 plant, excuse me, has 2 steps, whereas the C4 plant has an additional step here that has to take place. And then if you'll look over to the CAM plant, the CAM plant actually performs things at different parts of the day. It does this process during the nighttime, and it does this process during the day. Both of these plants perform all of these during the day, and at night the plant rests. Here, the plant is performing one set of reactions in the nighttime and 1 reaction during the day. C3 plants, again, do it all at once. Shows you how the different, if you look at the structure of the C3 and the C4 plant, you'll see that their cross-section of their leaves are made slightly different. Again, I'm not going to hold you responsible for the difference between bundle cells and veins and vascular bundles and all those kinds of things. But I do want you to remember that there is, a difference in the way these things are made, and that plays a role. Again, that looks like the leaf off of large sycamore tree or some other kind of tree. That's a corn plant. Corn is the C4 plant that we almost always talk about. But in hot, dry weather, the stomata close to conserve water. These stomata over here tend to stay open most of the time during the day. These will close during the hottest part of the day and then open later. They'll open early and they'll open late, but during the hottest part of the day, they will close. Photorespiration occurs due to oxygen buildup inside the leaf, decreasing the efficiency of photosynthesis. And this buildup of oxygen simply occurs because these stomata are closed. Stomata are closed. The oxygen that's being produced by photosynthesis in that leaf can't get out of the leaf. C4 plants, again, light and carbon dioxide reactions occur in different cells. Carbon reactions occur away from oxygen to avoid photorespiration. Flowering plants in hot, sunny environments use the C4 pathway. Again, the example we always talk about is the corn plant. If you look here, all of photosynthesis is going to occur in the mesophyll cells of the C3 plant, but the Calvin cycle occurs in these veins, sometimes called vascular bundles, and the light reactions take place in the mesophyll. So light reaction takes place here. Products of the light reactions move into here, and the Calvin cycle takes place there. Can plants thrive in very hot, arid environments? They divide labor temporarily. All reactions for photosynthesis occurs in the mesophyll cells. Carbon reactions occur only at night in the cooler, moisture air to avoid photorespiration. Used by plants like this cactus that live in desert conditions. Interesting thing about life, there have been many, many movies made about the end of the world and what's going to bring about the end of the world. And more than likely, what's going to bring about, if anything happens to bring about the end of life on this planet, it's going to be something happens to plant life. If something happens to plant life, all the rest of life on this planet is eventually going to die. If there's no plants, there's going to be no oxygen being put back into the environment. The oxygen will quickly become depleted and we won't have anything to breathe. Or the plants, there's not going to be enough plants for the herbivores to eat. If there's nothing for the herbivores to eat, the carnivores don't have anything to eat. So if we don't have producers, we don't have consumers. So ultimately, if anything happens to destroy life on this planet, it's going to have something to do with plant life. This is a nice little drawing here, or a demonstration of the way plants and animals work together. This is a female salamander. And what she's doing is she's laying her eggs. All of these little dots are her eggs. And those eggs are sort of in a glob of a jelly-like substance. And the jelly-like substance helps hold the eggs together, and it also helps maintain moisture on the eggs. But what this particular salamander does is it finds an area where there is an algae growing, and she lays her eggs amongst the algae. And then the algae starts to grow in amongst the jelly that's holding the eggs together, and the algae starts to form photosynthesis. Now, that does two things. It gives the algae a place to live, and it also benefits the eggs for the salamander, because the embryos within the jelly coat receive oxygen from the algae. The algae's growing, producing oxygen as a byproduct, and that oxygen is what oxygenates the developing babies within the embryos. The embryos also receive sugars from the different algae growing. So researchers used radioactive labels to show that embryos receive more sugars from the algae when grown in the light than in the dark. So basically, these embryos with the jelly receive oxygen from the algae. So this is a demonstration that was done with two different types of uh, salamanders. One salamander that does not develop in this little jelly bag. It's just free living. And you can see all of these numbers. DPM is disintegrations per minute, a measure of radioactivity. And look at the difference of all these different numbers. You've got over 12,000 here to only 600 here. You've got 294.5 nanograms to 15.4 nanograms. That's the average hourly change in carbon. And then you have the source of the carbon increase. So again, this type of relationship, I'll spit it out in a minute, where two things are living in one place and they're both benefiting, that is referred to as a symbiotic relationship. Lots of symbiotic relationships in nature. We will talk about more of them later on in this semester. So that is the story of photosynthesis. If you have any questions, please email me at trussell@uaptc.edu, or you can always drop an email in the course contact area under course messaging. That will conclude Chapter 5. I'll get this loaded on Blackboard. Have a great weekend.